No map, no coats thick enough, no adult hands to hold. Only a red ribbon, a broken whisper, "We have to find him." And Buck, a discarded canine, left behind for being too slow, too broken. But not today. When he tore free from the leash and ran howling toward the railroad, no one knew what he'd found, until it was almost too late. What happened next will break your heart and piece it back together. Because sometimes the only thing standing between death and salvation is a girl in a red dress and a dog who never gave up. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. And if you believe that loyalty doesn't expire, if you believe that heroes can have 4 legs and scars, hit that subscribe button. This story will stay with you forever. Silver Creek was the kind of town the maps forgot, tucked into the jagged belly of the Colorado Rockies, surrounded by forests that whispered secrets and mountains that looked down like silent gods. In December, the world here turned white and still. Snow blanketed the cabins, the pines, the crooked fences. The sky hung low and pewter gray, and every breath came out as fog. Silence reigned. Not peaceful silence, but the kind that settled in your bones and made you feel very small. 2 figures moved along the edge of the forest, twin flashes of red in a world of white. Hazel and Hannah Carter were 10 years old, but the way they walked made them seem older. Each carried the weight of worry on their narrow shoulders, their eyes wide with hope and something harder, desperation. They were sisters in every sense, same tangled auburn hair, same pale cheeks flushed pink from the cold, same handmade wool dresses dyed red by their mother's hands years ago. But their differences ran deep. Hazel walked with quiet determination. Her boots were laced tighter, her scarf tucked neatly beneath her coat. On her left wrist, tied snug and carefully centered, was a red ribbon frayed and faded but clearly loved. Her fingers toyed with it often, as if drawing strength from the memory it carried. Their mother had tied that ribbon for her last birthday, the last one when all 3 siblings were still together. Hannah, by contrast, moved like a flame quick and impulsive. Her scarf was half undone, her gloves mismatched, her eyes always darting through the trees as if expecting Evan, their older brother, to emerge from behind a snowbank with a sheepish grin and a joke about how long they took to find him. She carried nothing but a dull pocket knife she'd taken from the kitchen drawer and a silent promise whispered before they left the house. "We'll bring him home." It had been 4 days since Evan vanished. 4 days since he walked to the gas station on the edge of town and never came back. The town had searched, once. Then the snow came and the search parties dwindled. Silver Creek wasn't cruel, just tired. Too many missing, too many storms, too few answers. But Hazel and Hannah didn't need a search party. They had something better. They had Buck. Buck wasn't just a dog. He was a shadow with a heartbeat, a memory stitched into fur and bone. He walked beside them now, one paw dragging slightly in the snow with each step. His coat was thick and dark, black along the back and rust-brown down the legs, though his muzzle had gone silver with age and hardship. His ears were scarred. His eyes, a deep amber, missed nothing. 9 years old and once the pride of the Elk Ridge K-9 unit, Buck had served for 6 years alongside Officer Elias Moore. He had chased criminals down alleyways, sniffed out bombs in schools, found children buried under rubble. But 2 years ago, on a call gone wrong, Buck had leapt between Elias and an armed suspect. He took the shot that was meant to kill. He survived, barely. The department gave him a medal and a discharge notice. 2 injured for duty. Liability. He was left behind. The Carters had taken him in not long after, when their world had already begun to unravel. Their mother's illness had stolen her strength, then her voice, and finally her life. Their father vanished into debt and silence. Evan tried to fill the void. Buck tried too. The 2 became inseparable. It was Evan who gave him the name Buck. "I read about this soldier once," he told the girls as Buck rested his head on his lap. "Alone in a forest, injured and left for dead. But he kept going, crawled for miles, saved a whole unit when no one thought he'd make it. That's what this guy reminds me of. Buck, the soldier that wouldn't quit." Hazel hadn't heard that story in months, but she thought of it now. Buck walked beside her, limping but steady. He hadn't quit. Not then, not now. The forest around them grew denser. The pines leaned in like eavesdropping giants. The snow was thicker here, untouched. Hazel's breath came in quick bursts. Hannah broke trail, carving a winding path through knee-deep drifts, her hair wild under her hat. Buck sniffed the air often, ears twitching, nose close to the wind. Hours passed. The sun, such as it was, hovered behind clouds like a dull lantern. Somewhere far off, the faint groan of a shifting ice shelf echoed. Hazel adjusted the red ribbon on her wrist. Her fingers were numb, but she couldn't bear to take it off. They stopped near a tree split by lightning long ago, its trunk black and brittle, its branches skeletal. Hazel leaned against it to catch her breath. Hannah crouched nearby, checking her socks for snow. Buck stood still, too still, his body tensed, his ears pricked forward. He sniffed once, twice, then let out a low, guttural growl. Hazel straightened. "Buck?" The dog's muscles coiled like a spring, his breath puffed hot clouds into the cold air. Then, with a suddenness that shocked both girls, he lunged forward, snapping the leash from Hazel's wrist with a jerk that burned through her mitten. "Buck!" Hannah shouted, stumbling after him. He barked, loud, urgent, not playful, not aggressive warning. The forest swallowed his form quickly. Just a blur of fur, then prints in the snow, then nothing. Hazel didn't hesitate. "Go!" she yelled. They ran, boots sinking, scarves flying, following the barks, following Buck, into the trees, toward something unknown, something waiting. The trees thinned as Buck tore through them, leaving a jagged trail of paw prints and scattered snow. Hazel and Hannah sprinted after him, breath ragged, lungs burning from the cold and the sudden sprint. Branches clawed at their sleeves and tangled in their hair, but neither girl slowed. Buck was still barking sharp, rhythmic, and panicked. It was no longer just an alert. It was a call for help. The forest floor sloped downward, leading to a wide ravine where the snow grew heavier, clinging to every branch and stone. The crunch beneath their feet changed, the packed snow now mixing with gravel and old buried metal. And then they saw it. A strip of rusted railway cut through the clearing, barely visible under layers of white. The tracks curved into the trees like a forgotten scar on the land, the wooden planks beneath warped and splintered from years of neglect. It was the kind of place the town no longer remembered, the kind of place where things were hidden, not found. Buck was already there at the center of the tracks, his paws slipping slightly as he circled something lying motionless on the rails. "Hazel," Hannah whispered, slowing to a stop. Hazel didn't respond. She was already running. There, bound tightly with old rope, his jacket ripped and face bloodied, was Evan Carter. His wrists and ankles were tied to the rails, arms awkwardly crossed above his head. His face was turned to the side, half buried in snow. A dirty cloth gag stretched across his mouth, soaked dark where he'd likely bitten down too hard. His eyes were shut, but fluttered as Hazel fell to her knees beside him. "Evan!" she cried, pulling at the ropes with shaking fingers. "Evan, we're here!" Hannah dropped beside her sister, her face pale with shock. "He's breathing," she gasped. "He's warm." Buck growled low and pressed his nose to Evan's chest, then moved to the ropes, trying to chew at the thick knots. His jaws strained, teeth snapping over the fibers. He whimpered with frustration but didn't stop. His front paws dug into the snow, anchoring him as he pulled with all he had. A distant sound broke through the air, a whistle. Faint, but rising. The ground beneath them began to hum. Hazel's fingers trembled violently as she fumbled with the knots. They were tight old rope, crusted with ice and pulled taut. She couldn't get any leverage. "Hannah," she panted, "your knife!" Hannah fumbled inside her coat and pulled the dull kitchen knife free. Her hands were shaking, but she handed it over. Hazel took it and tried to saw at the rope around Evan's wrists, but the blade barely made a dent. She pushed harder. "I'll get the legs," Hannah said, crawling down to Evan's boots where the rope had been wrapped cruelly around the metal of the rails. She began slicing at the fibers with fast, shallow movements. Her gloves slipped and she yanked them off for better grip. The whistle grew louder. The rails began to vibrate. A blast of wind pushed through the trees behind them. Hazel kept sawing, her teeth clenched. "Come on, come on!" Hannah's hand slipped. She gasped, blood instantly welling from a shallow gash across her palm. The knife had glanced off the icy rope and sliced her hand open. "Hazel," she whispered, pressing her wrist to her coat. The red seeped quickly into the white fabric, blooming like a dark flower. She clenched her fist, pushed the pain away, and kept cutting. Buck barked again, this time a full roaring warning. He backed up and rammed his shoulder into Evan's side, trying to move him, drag him, anything. Hazel cried out as the final rope on Evan's wrist gave way. His hand slumped to the side. She tore the gag from his mouth. He groaned faintly. "Evan," she sobbed, pressing her forehead to his. "We're here. We found you." The rail beneath her vibrated more violently now. The whistle split the air, closer than ever. A black blur began to appear around the curve of the tracks, its shape monstrous through the curtain of snow. Hannah screamed, "We have to move him now!" But Evan's body was heavy, limp. Hazel and Hannah grabbed under his arms, feet scrambling in the snow as they tried to drag him. Buck barked, then bit at Evan's jacket collar, pulling backward with everything he had. The train bore down, thunder growing, its horn a scream that tore the world in half. Then, with a final jerk, Evan's legs came free. The scream of the train horn shattered the air like a lightning strike. Trees shook, snow cascaded from branches. The rails beneath Hazel's knees vibrated so violently now she could feel it in her ribs. Evan's weight slumped between her and Hannah, unmoving, half buried in snow and too heavy for two children to carry alone. Hannah's hand, still bleeding, slipped against the icy fabric of her brother's coat, her breath coming out in sobs that froze instantly in the wind. Buck didn't hesitate. The German shepherd launched forward with a force that defied his age and injury. His jaws locked around Evan's collar and pulled, legs braced, claws scraping at the packed snow. He growled, not in aggression, but in sheer effort, the sound of an animal doing everything it could to save the one it loved. Hazel shouted, her voice raw, "Pull, Buck! Pull!" She and Hannah threw their weight backward, dragging Evan inch by inch, their boots slipping. Hannah's wounded hand left red streaks across the snow, but she didn't stop. The black nose of the freight train appeared around the bend, massive and fast and final. 15 seconds. Buck barked, then lunged again, nearly lifting Evan's torso with his teeth. Hazel screamed and yanked harder, tears mixing with the wind in her face. Hannah slipped, scrambled up, gritted her teeth. 10 seconds. The rails sang with tension. The ground trembled. Wind whipped at their coats. Hazel's red ribbon snapped in the wind like a signal flag. 6 seconds. One final heave. Buck, Hazel, and Hannah working as one desperate unit, and Evan's legs cleared the rail. They collapsed backward into the snow, Evan falling over them like a rag doll. Hazel wrapped her arms around his chest. Hannah pulled his feet into her lap. Buck stood over them, panting hard, chest heaving, his front paw bleeding from a torn nail. And then the train passed. A blur of black and silver thundered by just feet away, the roar so loud it was almost silence, the rush of air lifting snow into a cyclone. The twins held each other, held Evan, held still. Buck didn't move. He just stood there, ears pinned, eyes locked on the metal monster tearing through the forest, as if daring it to come closer. When it was gone, the silence felt louder than the noise had. Evan stirred first, a low groan escaping his cracked lips. His eyelids fluttered. "Hazel?" Hazel pressed her face into his neck. "You're okay. You're safe." Buck whined and nudged Evan's arm. Evan reached up weakly and brushed his paw. "Buck? That you?" Hannah laughed through her tears. "You owe him a steak." They stayed like that for a moment, four beings in the snow, broken but alive. A red ribbon flapped in the wind, tangled in a branch. Then came another sound, softer, more distant, the crunch of boots in snow. Hazel sat up, wiping her face. Hannah grabbed the knife and held it like she knew how to use it, even though her hand was shaking. Buck turned toward the sound and growled low, his body tense again. A tall figure appeared through the tree line, moving slowly but deliberately. He wore a navy blue field jacket with a faded sheriff's patch, dark jeans, and snow-crusted boots. A knit cap covered his graying blonde hair. In one gloved hand he held a flashlight, the beam dancing through the trees. In the other, a radio. "Sheriff Dispatch," he muttered into it. "I've located the source of the canine signal. 3 minors, 1 unconscious. Situation appears stable. I'm approaching now." Hazel's eyes widened. "Who?" The man stepped into the clearing. His face, though lined with age and framed by stubble, was kind. His name tag was barely legible beneath layers of frost. Moore. "Easy, kids," he said, raising both hands. His voice was deep but gentle. "I'm Officer Elias Moore. I'm here to help." Buck's growl faded. He stepped forward. Elias stopped. He stared at the dog as if he'd just seen a ghost. His eyes flicked to the scar across Buck's hind leg, the graying muzzle, the intense amber stare. Buck took another step forward and sat calm, steady, then tilted his head. Elias whispered, "Buck?" Hazel blinked. "You know him?" The man dropped to one knee, snow crunching beneath him. "I trained this dog," he said slowly. 3 years ago. He saved my life in a warehouse fire, took a bullet for me. I thought they retired him after that." "They did," Hannah said, voice hoarse. "He came to live with us, with Evan." Elias looked at the boy, now conscious but too weak to move, and then back at Buck. The dog moved closer and placed a paw gently on Elias's knee. "No way," Elias breathed. "No way they threw you away." Hazel nodded. "They did, but Evan named him Buck, said he was like that soldier in the woods, the one who never gave up." Elias sat back, staring at the dog with a mix of awe and guilt. "You remember me, don't you, boy?" Buck barked once, short, certain. Elias smiled, slow and tired. "Of course you do." He clicked the radio again. "Send medical evac to my coordinates. 1 minor with blood loss, 1 possible concussion, and 1 hell of a dog." Hannah finally let the knife fall from her hand. She looked at Buck, then at the man. "Is he going to be okay?" Elias nodded. "He's better than okay. He just saved all of you." Elias Moore had seen combat zones and burning buildings, but nothing shook him quite like the way Buck looked at him in that clearing, so steady, so knowing. The same eyes that once stared through smoke and flame in a warehouse downtown now blinked up at him, amber and sharp, framed by snow and scars. The German shepherd limped slightly as he padded over to Elias, still proud, still loyal, despite the years and injury. Elias reached out and ran a gloved hand down Buck's back. "You saved me once," he murmured. "Now you've done it again." Buck leaned gently into him. Beside them, Hazel knelt over Evan, adjusting his coat. Hannah held Evan's hand tightly, her own wrapped in a bloodied strip of scarf. Elias scanned the trio. Evan was conscious but weak, his face pale beneath the smudges of dirt and bruises, lips cracked from cold. The twins looked as exhausted as they were determined, eyes glassy from cold and fear, but unflinching. Elias stood and spoke into his radio. "Unit 4 to base, med-evac confirmed, ETA 20 minutes. I'm taking them to my cabin until the snow lets up." He looked down at Hazel. "Can you walk?" Hazel nodded. "Good," he said, then picked up Evan in his arms with practiced ease. Evan groaned softly but didn't resist. "Let's go." Elias's cabin wasn't far less than a mile through the trees, tucked behind a narrow ridge and nearly invisible from any road. It had once belonged to his uncle, a retired forest ranger. After his discharge from the K-9 unit, Elias had taken it over, preferring silence and pine needles to town gossip and empty apartments. The cabin was small but solid, built from dark logs and sealed tightly against the cold. Smoke drifted from its chimney like a welcome sign. Inside, the warmth hit them instantly, fire crackling in the stone hearth, the scent of cedar and coffee thick in the air. Elias laid Evan on the pull-out couch near the fireplace and threw an extra quilt over him. "He needs fluids and rest," he said, more to himself than anyone else. He opened a cabinet and retrieved a worn green first aid box. "Let me see your hand," he told Hannah. She hesitated, then held it out. The cut was deeper than he'd hoped, a long slice across her palm already clotting. "You'll need stitches later," he muttered, cleaning it gently. Hannah winced but didn't flinch. "You're tough," he added. "I have to be," she replied. Hazel, meanwhile, knelt by the fire, holding Buck's paw in her hands. One of his nails had been torn during the frantic pull on the tracks, and blood had frozen into the fur between his toes. "You didn't have to help," she whispered to him, "but you did anyway." Buck rested his head on her lap, content. Elias turned to Evan. "Can you talk?" Evan coughed once, then nodded slowly. "I went looking for them," he rasped. "Didn't want them out alone. Got too far from the house, heard something behind me." Hazel moved closer. "Was it the man?" Evan's eyes flicked toward her, then to Elias. "Yeah, big guy, wore a ski mask, said he was just going to teach a lesson, didn't say who sent him. Took my phone, my knife, everything, dragged me through the trees, tied me up in some shack, didn't even feed me." Elias's jaw tightened. Next thing I remember, Evan continued, I woke up on the tracks. Thought I was going to die out there. You almost did, Hannah said softly. She held up her bandaged hand. We cut you out. Evan's lips twitched in a weak smile. That sounds like you. Any idea who it was? Elias asked. Evan shook his head. Too dark. He didn't talk much, but he sat up slightly, eyes widening. There was a map on the wall of that shack. I only saw it for a second before he knocked me out again. Hazel perked up. She reached into her coat and pulled out a folded, damp piece of paper. I found this earlier, she said quietly, near an old shed on the way into the woods. Didn't think it meant anything, but it had Evan's boot prints nearby, so I kept it. Elias took the paper from her. It was smudged with moisture and dirt, but the lines were still clear paths leading deep into the forest, symbols drawn in charcoal. A rough sketch of what looked like cabins or small structures. One had a circle drawn around it in red ink. This looks like a root, Elias muttered. And this one, he pointed to the circled shape. That could be where he was held. You think it's still there? Hazel asked. Elias nodded slowly. Could be. Buck stood then, ears alert. Just outside, the sound of rotor blades in the distance signaled the incoming med team. Elias looked down at the dog. You want to help me finish what you started, don't you? Buck barked once, short and low. Snow had begun to fall again by the time Elias zipped up his field coat and stepped outside the cabin with Buck and Evan. It came in fine, windless sheets, quiet, almost delicate but thick enough to coat the ground anew and obscure old tracks. The moon hung low behind a veil of clouds, casting a silvery hue over the woods. The air was sharp and dry, and the forest looked like it had exhaled and frozen in that moment, perfect for hiding things. Elias glanced over at Evan, who was leaning against the porch rail, bundled in a heavy parka and a wool scarf wrapped twice around his neck. He looked pale and stiff, but the fire had returned to his eyes. You sure you're up for this? Elias asked. Evan nodded slowly. He left me, tied like garbage. If I can stand, I can help find him. Elias gave a slight nod. Good man. Buck, standing between them, emitted a low snort and wagged his tail once. The old shepherd had been alert the moment Elias picked up the map Hazel had given him. He now moved like he had a mission again limp present, but irrelevant, nose already testing the wind. Elias adjusted the strap of the backpack slung across his shoulder. Inside were flares, a first aid kit, and his sidearm, and clicked on a small tactical flashlight. The narrow beam cut through the haze of snowfall as the three figures moved into the woods. Back inside the cabin, Hazel sat at the wooden kitchen table, pencil clutched in one hand, the other trembling from fatigue and lingering adrenaline. Hannah was beside her, fingers still wrapped in gauze from the earlier injury, but she was focused, biting her lower lip as she leaned over the paper. The letter was short, just a few lines, but it had taken them an hour to write. Dear Buck, you remembered our brother when even the wind forgot him. Thank you. Hazel and Hannah. They placed it beside the hearth, propped up on a folded cloth. Buck would see it when he returned, and they both hoped he'd understand. Back in the woods, Elias and Evan trudged through snow that reached up to their shins. The cold was penetrating now, creeping up through soles and settling into joints. But Buck led with purpose. His nose traced an invisible trail between trees, pausing occasionally to sniff low brush or paw at something buried beneath a drift. It took them nearly half an hour to reach the spot marked on the map, a clearing surrounded by pine and brush, its entrance half blocked by a toppled birch. Beyond it stood a structure, if it could be called that. The cabin was little more than a rotting box with warped planks, a sagging roof, and a crooked door that hung open just an inch, squeaking slightly in the wind. The windows were shattered, black plastic nailed over the gaps. Elias motioned for Evan to stay back and moved forward, gun drawn, Buck tight at his side. The dog's body was tense, tail low, ears up. He emitted a low growl at the threshold but didn't bark. That meant no current occupants only memory. Inside, the air was thick with mildew and something else, something sweet and chemical. Elias wrinkled his nose. Chloroform, he muttered. The inside of the shack was bare bones, a metal cot with a stained mattress, rusted chains bolted into the wall, and a single bucket in the corner. The floorboards were cracked and uneven, revealing patches of earth beneath. On one wall, faint outlines of tape remained in rectangular shapes, Pictures or documents had once hung there, now torn away. Near the bed, Buck sniffed a dark patch on the floor and whimpered. Elias knelt beside him. "What is it?" Buck nosed the patch again, then sneezed violently. The scent must have been overpowering. Elias reached into his pocket, pulled out a sample kit, and scraped a portion into a small vial. He'd learned to carry one ever since the child trafficking case outside El Paso. Patterns always repeated, if you paid close enough attention. As he moved toward the back corner of the shack, his light caught something half hidden beneath a board. He pried it loose with a grunt and uncovered a small canvas pouch. Inside, a disposable phone, turned off, a child's mitten, and a Polaroid photograph creased and dirty. He turned it over. A boy, maybe 7, face gaunt, eyes bruised. Standing against a plain wall, shoulders rigid. A date scrawled in ink, 11/13. Elias exhaled slowly. There were others. Buck pawed at the corner again and let out a low, distressed moan. Elias turned back toward Evan. "This is where he kept you?" Evan nodded grimly. "For a while, but I don't think I was the first." "No," Elias said, pocketing the photo. "You weren't." He tapped his radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Moore. I'm requesting immediate escalation. I need Special Operations, Human Trafficking Division. Coordinates to follow." "Copy that," came the reply, crackled through static. Buck barked once. It was not a warning. It was readiness. "Come on," Elias said, his voice quiet. "We've got work to do." By the time the Special Operations team arrived at the clearing, dawn was beginning to push against the edge of the sky. Pale gold filtered through the trees, casting faint glimmers on the snow-covered pines. Elias stood at the edge of the clearing with Buck by his side, steam curling from their breath. Evan had been escorted back to the cabin with an officer for medical checks, leaving Elias and Buck to lead the tactical team through what was left of the shack. The officers moved silently, swift and deliberate, dressed in dark tactical gear with thermals tucked beneath. The leader of the team was Agent Mara Whitaker, a sharp-eyed woman in her early 40s, built lean and wiry from years of field work. Her black hair was tied into a no-nonsense bun beneath a fleece-lined cap, and her voice, though quiet, carried command. "Looks like they cleared out fast," she murmured, stepping into the shack and glancing around. "But not cleanly." Elias nodded. "They weren't expecting us to find it this soon." Buck moved ahead, nose to the ground, tail low and tight with focus. He sniffed the floor near the cot again, then padded to the back wall, where boards had been hastily nailed. He stopped there, growled low, then barked once. Mara raised an eyebrow. "What's he got?" Elias knelt beside the wall and ran his hand along the floorboards. "Hidden entrance, maybe," he muttered. He knocked once, twice. The third knock sounded hollow. "Give me a pry bar," he said. One of the agents, a burly man with a shaved head named Riker, handed him the tool. Riker was silent, dutiful, and known for moving like a grizzly when required. But at that moment, he just stood and watched Elias wedge the bar beneath the warped wood. With a crack and creak, the board came up. A dark void opened below, musty air rising with it. "Looks like a runoff tunnel," Elias said. "Old mining shaft, maybe." Buck barked again. He stepped forward, head dipping, and then descended slowly into the darkness, careful despite the slick ice. Mara gestured to her team. "Two down with him. Quiet. No lights until you clear the first turn." Elias dropped down second, flashlight off, hand on the grip of his sidearm. The tunnel sloped downward, its walls narrow and lined with half-frozen moss. The smell of damp concrete, rust, and something else mildew and metal filled the air. Buck led, his ears twitching, his nose to the ground. After 20 paces, they found the first sign. A threadbare wool glove, child-sized. Elias picked it up carefully and passed it to Mara, who slipped it into an evidence pouch. "It's recent," she said. A few feet farther, they found a discarded meal tray, still smeared with hardened beans, and the outline of a boot print in the soft mud lining the tunnel wall. Buck sniffed it, then looked back at Elias and whined softly. "He remembers this scent," Elias said. "We're close." The tunnel curved left, then opened into a wider chamber stone walls, once reinforced with timber, now cracked. Several plastic mattresses lined the far end, all with thin gray blankets. Against one wall, 2 sets of restraints hung limply. A plastic bin sat in the corner, full of torn-up clothing. No people, no voices. But it felt freshly emptied. Riker clicked his radio. No hostiles, area clear, but this was in use less than 24 hours ago. Mara stepped forward and examined a metal cabinet bolted to the wall. She picked the lock with a quick flick of her wrist. Inside, dozens of manila folders, some damp at the edges but still legible. Names, dates, photos, ages ranging from 7 to 16. Mara's hands tightened around one folder. "These are intake logs," she said. They were cycling through victims, pulling them from places no one would look: runaways, group home kids, even local families. They tagged them like livestock. Buck let out a low growl and pressed his head against Elias's leg. Elias looked down, then away, his jaw clenched. "We were too late." "But not useless," Mara replied. "Now we know where they moved them." She handed him one folder in particular. At the bottom, stapled crookedly, was a familiar name, Evan Carter, marked, "Transfer Cancelled." Elias stared at the paper, then folded it closed. He was going to be taken out of here for good. Mara tapped her radio. "Pull in the techs. We're photographing and collecting everything. Tell State and FBI to get the backup team on site. I want this whole network exposed." As agents fanned out to process the scene, Buck paced to the far side of the chamber, sniffing near a mound of snow that had leaked in through a crack in the stone wall. He pawed at something buried beneath it, then looked back and barked. Elias walked over, knelt, and brushed aside the snow. There, hidden in the shadows and half frozen into the ground, was something he hadn't expected. A badge. A small silver and gold K9 unit badge, worn and scratched, still pinned to the shredded collar of an old tactical harness. Elias swallowed hard. His fingers trembled as he lifted it gently from the ground. It was his. The one he had taken off Buck 3 years ago, after the department forced him to retire the dog due to irreversible injury. He remembered placing it on a hook in the station locker room, back when he thought Buck would forget him. He turned toward the shepherd now, who watched him with calm eyes, as if he'd known this was coming all along. "You came full circle, didn't you?" Elias whispered. Buck wagged his tail once. Elias knelt and clipped the badge onto the new harness he'd given Buck earlier that morning. "Welcome back, partner." The snow had settled gently overnight, smoothing out the jagged scars of the forest and town alike, as if nature itself had paused to honor what had been survived. In the heart of Silver Creek, the town square glowed with amber light, strung from low-hanging cables and wrapped around pine posts like warmth in the midst of cold. Folding chairs were arranged in careful rows, and townspeople wrapped in wool coats and mismatched mittens gathered shoulder to shoulder, murmuring with anticipation. There was no brass band, no banners. But the silence held weight. This was Silver Creek's way of honoring a miracle. Near the center stood a wooden platform, hastily built but sturdy. Atop it stood Sheriff Shirley Maynard, a woman whose presence always quieted a room before she even spoke. 60 years old, wiry and upright, with a square jaw and steel-colored hair pulled tight beneath her officer's cap, she'd served Silver Creek longer than many had lived in it. Known for her blunt honesty and a gaze that could cut through lies like frost through glass, Maynard wasn't known for ceremony. But today, even she seemed slower, more careful with her words. Next to her stood Officer Elias Moore, dressed in formal blues beneath a thick overcoat. The silver badge on his chest gleamed faintly under the early light. His face bore signs of long nights and little rest, deep lines near his eyes, a purple shadow on his jaw where exhaustion had hollowed him. But he stood tall. On his left, slightly behind, was Buck. Buck looked different now. Not in form. His limp was still there, his coat still dulled at the edges, but in bearing. He stood with his head high, ears alert, tail still. His old K9 harness had been cleaned and repaired, and at the front, clipped carefully in place, was his restored badge, the one Elias had found half frozen in the dirt beneath a trafficker's tunnel. Buck blinked slowly as the sheriff approached, the hum of the gathering quieting into a hush. Maynard cleared her throat. Her voice was strong but even. "This town has always known hardship," she began. "We've lost things, people, time, and sometimes faith." She paused, glancing around the crowd. "But this week, something found us again. Courage, in small forms, in children, in old bones, in four-legged shadows." She turned to Buck. "This dog," she said, placing a hand gently on the shepherd's shoulder, "was written off, discarded. His badge stripped because someone believed a limp meant he couldn't serve. But he did serve. He never stopped. She unclipped the badge from her pocket. Polished silver. The number etched into it had faded, but the symbol, a leaping shepherd over a shield, was unmistakable. "Buck," she said, voice softer now. "You were never not K9. You were only waiting to do what no one else could." She leaned down, clipped the badge to Buck's collar, then stepped back. The crowd didn't cheer. They stood and clapped, slow, steady, sincere. Buck tilted his head. Then, in a movement that seemed almost rehearsed, he lifted his paw and placed it gently into Elias's outstretched hand. Elias knelt beside him, whispering something only Buck could hear. The dog's tail wagged once. The sheriff wasn't done. "We're not just here for Buck," she said. Two girls, not even old enough to vote, crossed a forest during a blizzard. No training, no backup. Only a red ribbon and love strong enough to wake a mountain. She gestured to the front row, where Hazel and Hannah Carter sat bundled in second-hand coats, their red dresses barely visible beneath the layers. Their cheeks were pink from cold, but their eyes were bright. Hazel clutched the red ribbon in her gloved hand. Hannah's wounded palm was wrapped neatly now, but she held tight to her sister's arm. "Hazel." "Hannah," Maynard said, voice warmer. "Come up here." They hesitated, then stood. Buck trotted to meet them halfway, circling once before nudging them forward with his nose. The girls giggled, nerves melting beneath the shepherd's touch. On stage, Sheriff Maynard bent and handed each girl a small wooden box. Inside was a town commendation badge, a copper coin with the Silver Creek seal etched deep, and the words, "For courage beyond fear." "You reminded us what courage looks like," Maynard said. "You reminded us what family means." The applause came louder this time. A few people wiped their eyes. Someone called out, "That's the Carter girls!" And someone else added, "Buck too!" And suddenly the entire square was alive with warmth that defied the cold. Elias stepped forward one last time. "I used to think Buck's job ended when his badge came off," he said. "That what made him special was something trained. But I was wrong. What makes Buck who he is was never the badge. It was the heart behind it." He glanced toward the girls. "And what makes people like Hazel and Hannah heroes isn't age or size. It's that they didn't wait for someone else to be brave first." As the ceremony drew to a close, townspeople approached the stage, some with cookies wrapped in napkins, some with old photos of dogs long gone. Buck received every pat with patience, every word with a gentle blink. Children knelt beside him. Veterans saluted him. And in the middle of it all, he stood tail wagging slightly, ears up, badge gleaming. Spring crept into Silver Creek like a memory coming home. The mountains still wore their white caps, but the lower slopes began to bare their bones. Patches of thawed earth, muddy and rich with promise, peeked from beneath the receding snow. Birds, absent for months, returned with cautious song, and the wind lost its bite, trading frost for the scent of damp pine and old secrets unearthed. Hazel Carter, now 11 but feeling years older, pressed her gloved fingers into the soil with a care that only survivors possess. Her red ribbon, now faded to the color of rusted maple, was tied around her ponytail. Beside her, her twin sister Hannah knelt silently, bandaged hands still healing but steady as she poured water from a tin pail onto the small sapling nestled in the earth. The apple tree was barely taller than their knees, its young trunk shivering slightly in the early spring breeze. The ground they worked on sloped gently beside the long-forgotten rail line, the place where winter had nearly taken Evan. Where snow and silence once ruled, now bloomed the quiet of rebirth. Evan Carter stood close by, hands in his jacket pockets, his face half in shadow beneath a worn ball cap. His cheeks were hollow from the weight loss, and his eyes still held the distant sheen of someone who had stared too long into fear. Yet now they were focused on his sisters, on the tree, on the dog lying beside it. Buck rested with his front paws crossed, body curled into the warming grass, head tilted slightly as he watched the children with quiet interest. His thick black and tan coat was shedding in tufts winter's armor giving way to the new season. The old scar on his right side was barely visible now, softened by time and good care. One ear flicked at the sound of a crow overhead, but his eyes never left the trio in front of him. Elias Moore leaned against the hood of his cruiser a few feet away, arms folded across his chest. The sun lit the edge of his jaw, revealing the first traces of stubble he hadn't bothered shaving that morning. He wore his uniform jacket open over a flannel shirt, more relaxed than usual. Watching Buck and the Carter kids had that effect. He didn't speak, but when Buck glanced his way, they exchanged something wordless and solid, a trust built from fire, distance, and reunion. It was Evan who finally broke the silence. "Will it even grow?" he asked, not mocking, genuinely curious, almost afraid to hope. Hazel looked up. "Apple trees are stubborn," she said. "Like Buck." Hannah chuckled softly, the sound small and sweet. "We asked the nursery lady. She said trees remember where they were planted. This one will remember us." The nursery lady in question had been Mrs. Ellen Brooke, a warm, round woman in her 60s with thick gardening gloves and a laugh that could startle birds off rooftops. She donated the sapling after hearing the full story from Sheriff Maynard herself. Ellen believed every tree needed a reason, and this one had 8. 3 children, 1 dog, and 4 seasons worth of second chances. Beside the tree, Hazel picked up a wooden sign they'd carved the day before. Evan had helped sand the edges, and Elias had brought varnish to weatherproof it. The letters, uneven but deeply etched, read, "Where a brother was saved by love, and a bark that never stopped." She pushed the post into the dirt, steadying it as Hannah packed the base with soil. Buck wagged his tail once and gave a soft, approving whine. The ceremony was unofficial, no crowds, no cameras, just them. But for the Carter siblings, it was more sacred than any parade. They had nearly lost each other in that forest. And here, beneath the thinning snow, they were planting something to stay. Elias stepped forward, pulling something small from his coat pocket. It was a photo one snapped at the ceremony weeks earlier. In it, Buck wore his new badge, flanked by the Carter girls, both in red dresses. Evan, still pale and thin, stood behind them. It was the only picture the 3 of them had together since their parents had passed. He handed it to Evan. "You should keep this," Elias said simply. Evan took it with both hands, studying it. "You know," he murmured, "I used to think I had to protect them. That being the big brother meant I couldn't ever need help." He looked at Buck. "But that day, I heard him before I saw him. That bark cut through everything, and I knew I wasn't alone." Buck let out a low huff, eyes half-lidded but listening. Hazel knelt beside the dog, her ribbon fluttering lightly. "He remembers us like the tree will," she said. "Right, Buck?" Buck's only reply was to nudge her hand gently with his nose. Hannah reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded paper, a copy of the letter they had written days before. She laid it beside the sign, tucking it under a small stone to keep the wind from stealing it. "You remembered our brother," she whispered, "when even the wind forgot him." For a while, no one said anything. The wind stirred the pine trees. A few birds chirped. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a distant truck engine hummed its way toward town. Elias turned to the kids. "You know," he said, voice gruff but kind, "Buck and I have to head up to June Hollow tomorrow. New case, new town." Hazel blinked. "You're leaving?" "Just for work," he said. "But we'll be around. Besides," he knelt to scratch Buck behind the ears, "he's got a lot of eyes watching him now. Kind of a celebrity." Buck leaned into the touch, sighing through his nose. Hannah asked, "Will he miss us?" Elias looked at her, then at Hazel, then at Evan. "He doesn't forget people, especially not the ones who loved loud enough to save someone." As the sun rose higher, they stood in a half circle around the sapling. Evan took the final step, bending to press his palm against the soil near the roots. His voice was almost inaudible. "I'm still here," he said, and that was enough. Sometimes in the coldest winters of our lives, when hope seems buried beneath silence and snow, God sends us miracles not with thunder, but with a bark, a ribbon, or the brave love of 2 little girls. Buck was more than a dog. He was a messenger of grace. He reminded us that even the forgotten can be found, even the lost can be led home, and even the broken can rise to save. In our everyday lives, we may not always hear divine whispers through dramatic rescues or heroic moments, but perhaps it's in the small things, a child's courage, a sibling's love, a stranger's help, that heaven speaks the loudest. Like Buck, we're all called to protect, to act, and to love without hesitation. If this story moved your heart, Please share it with someone who believes in second chances. Leave a comment below with Amen if you believe God still works through unexpected angels on 4 legs or 2. Subscribe to the channel for more true stories of hope and redemption, and may God bless and protect you and your loved ones through every snowstorm life brings. Sometimes faith looks like a child walking into the woods, and a dog who never forgot how to lead.